There's something strange happening to people today. We've never had more comfort. Never had more convenience. Never had more ways to distract ourselves from pain. And yet, people are mentally collapsing faster than ever. Not because life suddenly became harder, but because modern society trained people to react to everything. One negative comment ruins their entire day. One rejection destroys their confidence. One bad week makes them question their whole identity. And the terrifying part? Most people don't even realize they're being conditioned this way. Because a reactive person is easier to manipulate, easier to control, easier to sell fear to, easier to keep emotionally dependent. That's why calm people feel dangerous in today's world. A man who cannot be emotionally hijacked becomes difficult to influence, difficult to pressure, difficult to scare. And that's exactly why Stoicism matters now more than ever. Not as internet motivation, not as aesthetic philosophy, but as psychological armor for surviving modern life without losing yourself. In this video, we're going to break down 6 Stoic principles that can make you emotionally untouchable in a world designed to keep you overstimulated, anxious, distracted, and emotionally exhausted. But here's the part most people miss. The final principle is the one that changes everything. Because it exposes a hidden truth about why so many people feel empty even after getting everything they thought they wanted. And once you see it, you won't be able to unsee it again. So let's begin. Because if you don't learn how to protect your mind, this world will gladly rent space inside it for free. 1. Stop bleeding energy on things you never controlled. Think about how most people wake up today. Before their feet even touch the floor, they're already emotionally reacting. News, politics, social media, someone else's success, someone else's opinion, someone else's life. Their nervous system is in survival mode before breakfast. And slowly, without realizing it, they become addicted to emotional chaos. The Stoics noticed this problem 2,000 years ago. Marcus Aurelius wrote that human beings suffer more in imagination than in reality. And modern society turned that weakness into an entire business model. Fear sells. Outrage spreads. Emotional instability keeps people consuming. That's why emotionally reactive people are incredibly profitable. But Stoicism draws a brutal line through life. There are things you control, and things you do not. That's it. You control your actions, your discipline, your mindset, your response. You do not control people's opinions, betrayal, outcomes, aging, rejection, or whether life behaves fairly. Yet most people spend their entire lives emotionally fighting the second list. And it destroys them. You see it everywhere. A man loses sleep because strangers online misunderstood him. A woman spends years trying to be liked by people who secretly resent her. Employees destroy their health trying to control bosses who never cared about them in the first place. The Stoics would call this psychological slavery. Because when your emotional state depends on external approval, you no longer belong to yourself. One of the hardest truths I personally had to accept was this. Not every misunderstanding needs defending. Not every insult deserves a response. Not every battle deserves your nervous system. Sometimes peace is intelligence. And the strongest people you'll ever meet understand this deeply. They conserve emotional energy like it's life itself. Because it is. 2. Most suffering comes from stories, not reality. This principle alone can change someone's life. Because most people are not reacting to reality. They're reacting to the story their mind created about reality. Something happens. And within seconds the brain starts building a narrative. She ignored me. They don't respect me. My life is falling apart. I'm behind. I failed. Everyone else figured life out except me. The mind turns one moment into an identity. And social media made this infinitely worse. Because now people compare their worst emotional moments to carefully edited performances from strangers online. A man sees another person's success and suddenly feels inadequate. Not because his life is actually bad, but because comparison distorted his perception. Seneca warned about this centuries ago. He wrote about people suffering from imagined disasters long before those disasters ever arrived. That sounds ancient. Until you realize millions of people do exactly this every day. They rehearse failure before it happens. Rejection before it happens. Embarrassment before it happens. And eventually, they become exhausted by battles that never even existed. The Stoic response is simple but difficult. Strip the situation down to facts. Not interpretation. Not emotion. Not prediction. Just facts. For example, she didn't text back. That is a fact. She secretly hates me and I'll end up alone forever. That is fiction created by fear. This practice sounds small. Until you realize how much of modern anxiety is built on imaginary narratives. And honestly, I think many people today are not emotionally weak. They're mentally overcrowded. Too many voices. Too many comparisons. Too many imagined futures. Stoicism teaches you to return to reality. And reality is often far less terrifying than the story in your head. 3. Comfort is making people fragile. This is probably the most unpopular Stoic idea in modern culture. The Stoics believed difficulty was necessary. Not because suffering is beautiful. Not because pain is romantic. But because comfort hides weakness. Modern society sells the fantasy that life should always feel easy. Easy entertainment. Easy validation. Easy pleasure. Easy dopamine. But there's a hidden cost. People lose their ability to tolerate discomfort. And once someone loses that, life becomes terrifying. Because real life is uncomfortable. Relationships are uncomfortable. Growth is uncomfortable. Discipline is uncomfortable. Honesty is uncomfortable. Even silence became uncomfortable for many people. That's why people constantly need stimulation now. Music. Scrolling. Notifications. Background noise. Silence forces people to hear themselves. And many are running from what they might hear. Seneca deliberately practiced discomfort. Not as punishment. As preparation. He wanted to know. If everything collapsed tomorrow, would I collapse too? That question matters today more than ever. Because many people built identities around convenience. Then life removes one thing. Money. Attention. Status. A relationship. A career. And suddenly they no longer know who they are. The Stoics trained themselves before crisis arrived. And honestly, life taught me this the hard way. The moments that changed me most were never comfortable moments. They were moments where I had no control. No certainty. No emotional support. No applause. Just pressure. And pressure reveals truth. Not the truth people post online. The real truth. Who stays calm? Who panics? Who adapts? Who collapses? Difficulty exposes character faster than success ever will. That's why the Stoics didn't run from challenge. They used challenge to discover themselves. 4. Remembering death makes life real again. This principle scares people. But only because modern society trained people to avoid thinking deeply. The Stoics constantly reflected on death. Not in a dark, hopeless way. In a clarifying way. Because when people forget life is temporary, they waste enormous amounts of it. They postpone conversations. Delay dreams. Stay in toxic environments. Keep pretending. Keep waiting for the perfect time. And then one day, they realize years disappeared. Marcus Aurelius constantly reminded himself, you could leave life right now. Not to create fear. To create urgency. Because nothing exposes fake priorities faster than mortality. The argument you obsessed over suddenly feels small. The ego battle suddenly feels meaningless. The approval you desperately chased suddenly feels embarrassing. Death has a strange way of revealing what actually matters. And maybe that's why modern culture distracts people so aggressively. Because distracted people never stop long enough to ask, am I actually living the life I want? They just survive 1 week at a time. One notification at a time. One distraction at a time. One escape at a time. Until life quietly passes them by. Stoicism forces you to confront something uncomfortable. Time is not slowly approaching. It is actively leaving. And strangely, accepting this creates peace. Because once you truly understand life is temporary, you stop wasting emotional energy on nonsense. You become more present. More honest. More intentional. You stop trying to impress people you don't even respect. And for the first time, you begin living consciously instead of automatically. 5. Build an inner world the outside world cannot destroy. This might be the core of all Stoicism. Most people build identity on unstable things. Money. Relationships. Status. Attention. Reputation. Things that can disappear overnight. And when those things disappear, they disappear with them. The Stoics called this dangerous. Because if your peace depends entirely on external conditions, your peace is always hostage to the world. That's why they focused on building what Marcus Aurelius called the inner citadel. An internal place untouched by chaos. A place built from discipline, self-respect, integrity, clarity, emotional control. And honestly, this world desperately tries to pull people away from that place. Because insecure people are easier to influence. A man who deeply respects himself becomes difficult to manipulate with shame. A woman emotionally grounded becomes difficult to control through validation. That's why modern society constantly attacks internal stability. It profits from insecurity. But Stoicism teaches something powerful. You do not need external chaos to disappear before becoming peaceful. You need internal strength strong enough to survive external chaos. That changes everything. Because now your peace is not dependent on circumstances being perfect. It comes from knowing, I can handle reality even when reality becomes difficult. And that confidence changes how you walk through life. Not loudly. Not arrogantly. Quietly. Like someone who stopped needing constant reassurance. 6. The people who survive life best are usually living for something bigger than themselves. This final principle is the one modern society understands the least. People today are told happiness comes from endless self-focus. Your comfort. Your image. Your success. Your pleasure. Your brand. But many people secretly feel emptier than ever. Why? Because human beings were never designed to worship themselves endlessly. Marcus Aurelius constantly reminded himself that life becomes meaningful through contribution, through responsibility, through service, through connection. And strangely, when you stop obsessing over yourself, your suffering loses power. Because the ego becomes smaller. A person entirely focused on themselves becomes emotionally fragile. Every criticism feels personal. Every inconvenience feels unfair. Every rejection feels catastrophic. But a person focused on purpose becomes harder to shake. Not because life hurts less. Because meaning makes pain easier to carry. And I think many people today are not lacking pleasure. They're lacking purpose. That's why distraction became addictive. Because distraction temporarily numbs the feeling of emptiness. But numbness is not peace. Stoicism does not teach emotional suppression. It teaches emotional mastery. It teaches you how to remain human without becoming controlled by every emotion passing through you. And in today's world, that may be one of the rarest skills left. So let's bring everything together. The Stoics understood something modern society desperately tries to make people forget. A peaceful mind is powerful. That's why these 6 principles matter. Control what you can. Separate facts from emotional stories. Stop worshipping comfort. Remember, life is temporary. Build inner strength. Live for something greater than yourself. None of this is easy. But neither is constantly living anxious, reactive, distracted, and emotionally exhausted. One path requires discipline. The other quietly destroys people over time. And maybe the most important realization is this. The strongest people are not emotionless. They simply learned not to hand control of their inner world to everything happening around them. That is real power. Not domination over others. Mastery over yourself. If this video spoke to something you've been feeling lately, leave a comment below and tell me. Which of these 6 principles hit you the hardest, and why? And if you've been silently carrying pressure, stress, or emotional exhaustion for a long time, just know this. You are not weak for struggling. Modern life was designed to overload the human mind. But you can train yourself to become calmer, clearer, and harder to mentally break. If you want more videos about Stoicism, emotional discipline, modern psychological warfare, and mastering yourself in a chaotic world, subscribe to StoicCraft. And remember, the world profits from your confusion. So protect your mind like your life depends on it. Because in many ways, it does.